Welcome to the Libido Lounge, where we focus on all things love, lust, and libido. We believe that fabulous sex is important to health as exercise and good food. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode on the Lounge. I'm your host, libido expert, Dr. Diane, and I'm thrilled today about our next guest, Caitlin Arce, who is a friend of mine from very, very exciting dance classes, sensual dance classes that I've talked about on this show before. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. We're going to get into some of the juicy details that she does in her work as an embodiment coach, as a psychotherapist, as really a leader in women's arts and in finding the temple of the feminine inside of us. So we're going to talk about so many things around how to listen to your body, around how to heal traumas that are impacting our libido. And before we get into all those juicy details and this juicy conversation, I want to just remind you that this is sexy season. And remember, for sexy season, when you rate or review our podcast, share it with our friends, share it with your friends, send us a screenshot of that. We will enter you into all of our raffles and drawings and giveaways. During sexy season, we're trying to get the word out at even higher amounts. We need your help. So we're giving away memberships to our monthly Libido platform, where you get a ton of information of a ton of talks like this, educational experience, lab tests, and more. And for one lucky person, you will get a free admission into my 21-day desired libido jumpstart deep dive, which is $1,000 value. So make sure you get those reviews and ratings out there. We appreciate you so much, so much. And without further ado, welcome to the show, Caitlin. I'm so happy to have you on the lounge.
Thanks so much for having me, Diane.
So I think we're going to get into this really interesting topic today. I think so much of libido comes from, like, the way I often talk about libido is the practice of pleasure is the practice of presence. And it's very
Totally.
difficult to experience pleasure without presence. And one of the things that you are a wonderful master at in your own work and the work you do with people in your practice is helping them listen to their bodies. So
Totally.
let's start. Where do we start if we're like, wow, I'm numb, I don't feel stuff, or pleasure, what is that? I don't feel pleasure in my body. Like, how do we begin to listen to our pleasure bodies?
Yeah, I mean, the first part is just like listening to your body, period. Pleasure is one of the many sensations we can have, and certainly, like, yes, we want that. For a lot of my clientele, they're people that have experienced traumas in their body. Maybe they grew up like feeling invalidated by parents. Like, I'm talking like we think of trauma like the big T trauma. We think of like, oh, you experienced a sexual assault, you experienced someone being aggressive towards you, something like that. But really, there's all sorts of things kind of like built into our day-to-day society that our body experiences as traumas because it overrides our basic needs.
So I really love the conversation of like the big T, little T trauma. And I think there's more and more awareness of this, right? The little T traumas that are actually impacting us. So how does one begin to know? Like, can you give us an examples of some of like the little T traumas, and how does
Yeah.
one begin to even know, like, okay, if I have these little T traumas, am I holding them in my body? How do
Right.
we even know? How do we distinguish that?
Yeah, I'll share an example from my personal life. When I first got into womb healing, a lot of my work is emphasizing being in your feminine body and working with the womb specifically. The womb is a hollow organ, so it kind of energetically can suck in from all different directions anything that we're not ready to deal with. So when I was younger and I was first getting into this work, I was married at the time, and I would go to be intimate with my partner, and all of a sudden I'd be like doing my grocery list. Like, what? Like, what's going on there? Like, what we used to have such a sexy connection when we first met, and like, how come I'm like thinking of all these domestic things? And it wasn't until I realized the ways that I wasn't listening to myself, the ways that I was like trying to be a good wife and do things that I wasn't wanting, or do things that just weren't working for me. My ex was a wonderful man, so not to put anything on him in any way, but it was about me not listening to my own body, my own desire and my own needs, that I would just get like, so like, I'd get turned on, I'd get excited, and then it would fizzle into like, let me think about what I need from the grocery store. Let me think about this thing that happened 10 years ago that's completely irrelevant to what's happening now, and pull me out of the present moment.
I actually have a different podcast where I've talked specifically about the grocery store list during sexting. So this is like, I love that you bring that up as an example, because it's a perfect example, right? And to me,
Yeah,
it's like the mind can't, basically it's saying like the mind almost can't stay focused on the present, right? Is that something
totally.
here?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, and I think particularly as people with wombs, I'm sure not all of your listeners have wombs, but even if you once had a womb, you still energetically have one, and we tuck all sorts of things in that space, and it's through like clearing and being present with what is, whether it feels good or doesn't feel good, that we can start to get a better handle on those things.
Yeah, it's so well said. So then, in thinking about that, so now we have a sense in this process, right? So now we understand, okay, we have this body, our body is holding on to this trauma, it's not responding the way we want, it's not able to enjoy. Tell us
Mhm.
about this concept that we were talking about offline related to this, around like the nose, because when it's
Yeah.
interesting, and like what I had read and what you had written to tell our listeners offline is, the question that Caitlin had proposed is, how do we listen to the nose in the body? And it's such a good question, right? Because so often it's like, oh, well, or how do we override the nose? That was the question. And,
Hmm.
and so many times, like, we're taught to like, well, don't override the nose, listen to the nose. But what I hear in your question, what we were talking about offline, is like the nose and in our body actually have a lot of value. That's part of our story.
Totally.
Right? So let's
Yeah.
talk about that, and how is that related to, like, how
Yeah.
are those related to like our ability to enjoy sex and pleasure and experience
Oh,
libido?
yeah. Great question. So I noticed that a lot of women that come to me are not necessarily, I do work with a lot of trauma survivors, but I also work with a lot of people that just have kind of a buildup of no's that they didn't listen to. So that would look like, there's a new partner that you really are excited about, and they want to do something and you're not ready to do it, and you do it anyway. That would look like being submissive when you're actually wanting to be dominant. That would look like just moving a little too fast because you're like, oh, I'm going to have the kids. I don't have another free night without the kids until 2 Fridays from now, and like I want to get it in, even though I'm not totally ready. That's my life as a single mom. So, you know, um, and there's all these different ways that we're like, oh, this isn't totally right, but let me do it anyway. What we're teaching our body when we do that is to not trust us. A body that doesn't trust us is going to be turned off. If my body does not feel safe with me as the basis, as the protector, as the one that's going to listen when no one else will, um, it's not going to do what I want it to do. It's not going to be able to seek and find pleasure because it's not safe enough to open up. We have to be able to open our hearts, to have our hearts feel really safe. We have to be able to open our wombs and our pussies and have those feel really safe, and like it's okay for us to be open, because if something from the external world comes in and it's unsafe, I'm going to shut it down because I'm in control.
Okay, so I'm following you. So when you're saying what you're saying is, when we're overriding the no, so the problem is, that's actually the problem, right? Is that our body is like, hey, don't proceed. You're too busy in this,
Yeah.
your body isn't ready, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it shows up in my clientele of like just not being able to get juicy, not being able to soften those muscles of the pelvic floor to be able to receive someone, having physical pain during sex or even during self pleasure, not being able to orgasm, like all sorts of different ways it can show up. and or just not you're going through the sexual acts but not actually being able to receive them, and like, okay, on paper that was a hot sexy evening, but like I didn't really like it that much.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a course in my program called Having the Right Kind of Sex. And what you're actually making me think of this is like the right kind of sex is the kind that our body, pleasure body wants, right? So like this idea of
Totally.
writing the nose, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to have the wrong kind of sex, which is like not the right or wrong culturally. It's the right or wrong for our body. And I love
Totally.
that
Yeah.
angle of it. It's just,
Yeah.
what is your body actually saying
Yeah.
here?
And when you're in a really safe partnership that like these things have space to be expressed, like, yeah, I think it's totally great to experiment with like what does your partner want that maybe wouldn't have been something you'd been drawn to. But I'm talking more like wider lens of like we just need to as a baseline know that like if something doesn't feel right, we're going to listen. And our body will make us know how to do that, whether or not we want it to. So it's like just being more embodied, being more in communication with the different parts of you.
So here's my question on that, because one of the things I look at when I hear this is like differentiating between, say, needs and preferences. So the body,
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about like these no's of like, oh, these strong signals, and then there's other things where it's like, oh, well, maybe it's not my preference to do this, but I'm going to try this for my partner. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
I hear
Yeah,
that as sometimes a need versus preference.
totally.
Do you have any advice for people as far as like because I know some listeners are more in tune to those subtle senses in their body than others. So
Mm-hmm.
where is that line of like how do people begin to understand more like this is a hard no of like me not listening to my
Yeah,
body. I'm going to feel unsafe if I do this versus like, okay, this is maybe not my preference, but it actually feels
yeah.
okay to try this and to explore this because my partner is interested in that. How do we differentiate that?
Yeah, I mean, it is subtle and it is a skill and it's a learned skill. So that's the good news. If you don't have it, if you don't feel like in tune with your body, like I know how to listen to my body's signals, you can learn it. And it's not that hard for those of us that have a trauma history. It might take a little more unpacking and be better to do in like a supportive environment with a therapist or one of us. In with someone that doesn't explicitly have that type of history, like it's about listening to all of the signals. So I think a good practice is just to experiment with self-touch. It doesn't have to be your genitals, it could be anywhere on your body, and just notice sensations. So, like, I'm gonna just play with my hand, I'm gonna stroke my fingers, and I'm gonna see, do my fingers like when I pull on my joints? Oh, yeah, they like that. Do they like when I squeeze them? Oh, yeah, that's nice. Do I like to be tickled? What does that actually feel like? Oh, I like to be tickled here, but like, oh, there's a little too much. Okay. And like anything, it could be eating, it could be the way you're dancing when you're alone in your living room. It could be like experimenting with different types of bedding in your bed, and you're like, oh, these sheets feel nice and cool on my skin and I like that, and these sheets feel like like they're too heavy, I don't like that. Like just listening to those really subtle things and listening in a really neutral way of like it it doesn't have to be good or bad that you're experiencing this. It just is. Okay, this is my sensation. And that kind of helps unpack those things and helps us listen to those cues.
That's really helpful. I appreciate the actual practical advice there. And another thing I'm thinking about is like as you're saying that, whether it's eating, whether it's just touching your body sexually or non-sexually, is maybe even like asking oneself around like, okay, if I don't like this, like is it like I hate this? Like, is there
Mm-hmm.
the complete hatred where it would be like my body needs this, or needs doesn't need this is a no,
Mm-hmm.
or is this just like a preference, right? So we can continue to ask ourselves those things
Totally.
to almost practice
Totally.
easy. So when it's harder, we're more skilled at it, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think with a partner, it's really fun to like invite it in as a practice. It's like, we're going to do an experiment together. Let's play and see, like, oh, do I like this? Do I not like this? And instead of it being kind of like in the moment, because it can be really hard for a lot of people to ask for, like, oh, can you do that softer? Like, oh, can you give me a little more pressure there? Like, that can be hard for people, especially when they're newer to listening to the cues of their body to express. But if you set it up as a science experiment, then it feels a little safer to be like, okay, we're gonna play, and for like 20 minutes, I want you to like give me different types of touch, and I'll tell you what I like and don't like. And then for 20 minutes, we can do you, and you can tell me what you like and don't like.
Yeah, I think it's just such a great example of simple ways that we can actually begin to even know our partners better. Because it's so
Mm-hmm.
often in these longer term relationships, right? It's like one of the things that I imagine you talk to people about as well is we can fall into this like this thing where it's like, okay, first you go down on me and then I go down on you and then we do this, and then
Mm-hmm.
we do that, and then we do that, and then we climax and then we're done. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like sex becomes almost this like rhythmic thing where it's like A, B, C, D. And so even what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing in, this idea of like 20 minutes my turn, 20 minutes your turn, it's like getting out of that rut.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then talk to us a little bit about like the opposite. So another thing I know that you do a lot in your work is helping people really say yes to their body. So how do you find that in learning more about like, okay, I'm going to honor my body's nose. I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
show up for that. How does that translate also in to turning into the yeses, to saying yes more to the pleasurable things, to the body's say passion and desires and those sorts of things?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really is about like making it neutral, quite frankly. Like, I think when we're not chasing any one thing, when we're not pushing to any one thing, and we're open to the fullness of our experience, that we get more of that pleasure. Like, my homework for clients is often, I want you to go home and like touch yourself in some sort of pleasurable way. And I don't necessarily have an emphasis on sexuality in my practice. I do work with people a lot around their sexuality, but you know, I do like a lot of Mayan abdominal massage and Taoist abdominal massage, and that's rubbing your breasts and bellies and wombs, and like, how do you want that to look? Even like, yes, there is a formula that I will teach my clients, and they will learn how to do it in a specific way, but then once you one of my teachers used to say, once you know the chocolate chip recipe, then you can experiment and
Yeah.
add macadamia nuts, right? Like, you got to learn the recipes for some things that you like as a baseline, but then you get to experiment and see, like, oh, what do I want more of? And when we can do that in a supportive environment, that's even better. That's even better for like getting to that point quicker, because we can get over the roadblocks to pleasure quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, my final question for you today has something to do with what you are offering for our listeners, which is a coupon code to get your meditation on, basically embody with it's the clearing meditation, right? So your womb clearing
Yeah.
meditation for only $5, that's $10 off. And my question for you on that, and you guys will put all that in the show links for you, is from a standpoint of like clearing, what do you feel?
Hmm.
'Cause that's what this meditation's about, is clearing the womb. So
Hmm.
what do you find in the process? Like, first of all, what does that mean? And second of all, what do you
Yeah.
find in the process of working with that and doing the womb clearing? What does that do for the ability of, of us to show up as, as female bodies to, to ourselves and to our pleasure?
Yeah. So the code's going to be Embody 10 for the womb meditation. And I find this meditation is like one of the foundations of my practice. It's like often a place that I'll start with clients. And it's even better when they're doing something like this before they're coming to see me for the first time, because they already have some familiarity with what is the womb? Why should I care about the womb beyond my period, beyond trying to get pregnant, beyond my fibroids, or, I work with a lot of people with reproductive health concerns as well. So so that's often kind of the inroad for people to find me. But the womb itself is, like I said, it's a place where we can hold things. So if we get more awareness around, like, what am I holding in there? What do I want to be holding in there? That's to speak to your last question about pleasure. Like, that's one of the inroads to pleasure, is like, okay, I'm clearing out bad medical experiences, that doctor that just went ahead and stuck their hand up there before they asked my permission. I'm clearing out past lovers that I want nothing to do with anymore. I'm clearing out, stories that I was told about what it is to be a woman, what it was to be a menstruating person, what it was to be a person who's capable or has had children. And, clearing out any health concerns, and bad experiences with getting treatment for those. So that's kind of step one. Step two is like, what do I want to invite? This is a way that I find that women get, like, just like, obviously more embodied in themselves, but like more grounded and centered in themselves. The womb is like one of the only parts of our body that can one of the only organs in our body that can, like, physically go out of alignment. And when it does, we find ourselves, like, just not feeling grounded or centered, or like even our sense of belonging at its core can be threatened when we're out of alignment. So this is kind of step one to getting in better alignment, to calling in the energy of the earth, the energy of self-love, the energy of pleasure, of aliveness, so that we can run that energy through our bodies and just have more of what we want in our world.
I
And like
love
I said, yeah,
it.
thanks. It's not just for people that physically have wombs, but even for trans women, and even for women that have had hysterectomies, it's still accessible to them as well, because we're still working with the energetic womb, even if there's not a physical womb space.
Yeah, and what you're reminding me of is I've done my own versions of this, and I was clearing out one time energy from a past lover, and there was like this giant hook, and the hook was like way up in my
Mm,
cervix, and I was just clearing and clearing, and it was like this
yeah.
like ginormous, right? It was like this huge 4 inch in diameter tube that was connected to this hook, and it felt as I was like pulling this out of me energetically and doing this work. It just felt
Hmm.
like there was this complete separation finally from me and,
Yeah.
this person that wasn't beneficial to have in my life anymore.
Yeah.
And that shift, I think was really profound. So
Totally.
that
Yeah.
really cool giveaway. It's a really great gift to our audience. So thank you
Thanks.
for that. I want to make sure that everybody knows that we will have all of that information in the show notes, that you can find Caitlin at Embody the Temple Healing Arts, and we'll have all of the contact information of how to work with her and all of that, and the meditation in our show notes for you. So thank you so much for your time today. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you being here, Caitlin.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And just to wrap up, you guys, I want to remind everybody that we have our thing that we're doing this year is for everybody that is on our show this year. Rate them, review them, send it around to our friends, download it. Whoever gets the highest amount of downloads, we are going to invite them back for a deep dive late in this year of 2024. So make sure to download this. Make sure to share this with your friends. We'd love to have Caitlin back and go way more into a more lengthy conversation on all of these topics. And this is Dr. Diane, your libido doc, reminding you to stay sexy, stay classy, and always be a little badassy. See you next time.